"Excuse me," the woman behind me whispered just as everyone in the chapel began to stand. "Your husband spent 20 years making sure you would never learn the truth before he was gone." I froze with one hand resting on the back of the pew. For a brief second, I wondered if grief had distorted what I heard. I turned slowly and found a woman about my age watching me with calm blue eyes. She was dressed in a simple navy suit, her silver hair neatly pinned back, and she held a small black handbag on her lap. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance. She looked like someone who had spent her entire life blending into the background. Yet the certainty in her voice unsettled me more than anything that had happened since my husband passed away. Before I could ask who she was, the pastor stepped toward me to offer his condolences. Friends and neighbors surrounded me almost immediately. Hands reached for mine. Familiar faces offered kind words that disappeared into a blur of sympathy. By the time I looked over my shoulder again, the woman had quietly moved toward the aisle. She did not rush. She simply waited until the crowd around me grew thicker, then walked toward the exit without looking back. "My name is Margaret Sullivan. I am 68 years old, and until that afternoon I believed I had understood every important chapter of my 42-year marriage." David had been respected throughout our community. He built a successful construction business from almost nothing, coached youth baseball on weekends, remembered birthdays without reminders, and never forgot our anniversary. We raised one son, Michael, in a comfortable home outside Denver. Like every marriage, ours had disagreements, disappointments, and seasons when life became difficult, but I never questioned whether I truly knew the man I married. During the reception after the memorial service, people filled paper plates with sandwiches and fruit while sharing stories about David's generosity. Michael stood across the room speaking confidently with relatives, accepting condolences as though he had practiced every response. His daughter Emily remained close to me, quietly making sure I had coffee and reminding me to eat something. Every few minutes I caught myself searching the room for the mysterious woman, but she had disappeared. I finally convinced myself that perhaps she had mistaken me for someone else. Grief can make strangers say unusual things. That explanation was comforting, even if I did not completely believe it. Nearly everyone had left by late afternoon. I was gathering sympathy cards into a small box when Emily touched my arm. "Grandma," she said softly, "someone asked me to give this to you after the service." She handed me a plain white business card with no company logo and no address. On the front was a single name printed in black letters: Eleanor Brooks. I turned the card over. Written neatly in blue ink were 8 words that instantly erased every comforting explanation I had invented. "Do not trust anyone carrying your last name." I slipped the card into my purse before anyone else could see it. Something about those 8 handwritten words told me they were never meant for public eyes. Emily watched my face carefully. "Is everything all right?" she asked. I forced a small smile that did not feel convincing even to me. "Just someone from your grandfather's past," I said. "Probably nothing important." The lie surprised me. I had never been comfortable hiding things from my family, especially not from Emily. But something deep inside warned me that the message on that card was too serious to share until I understood it myself. That evening, I drove home alone. The house felt strangely unfamiliar without David's truck in the driveway. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and was greeted by the quiet that always follows a funeral. Sympathy flowers lined the kitchen counter. Cards covered the dining room table. His reading glasses still rested beside his favorite chair exactly where he had left them 2 weeks earlier. I sat down in the living room and stared at the business card again. Eleanor Brooks. The name meant nothing to me. I tried to remember every woman David had ever introduced me to through work, church, charity events, or neighborhood gatherings. Nothing fit. I even opened an old address book that I had not touched in years. No Eleanor. No Brooks. It was as though she had appeared from nowhere for the sole purpose of delivering one impossible warning. Around 8 o'clock, my telephone rang. It was Michael. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked. His voice sounded warm, almost overly careful. "I am managing," I replied. "The house is just very quiet." "That will get easier with time," he said. "Listen, I was thinking, maybe this weekend I could come by and help organize Dad's office. There are probably legal papers and financial documents that need attention." The request caught me off guard. David had been gone less than 48 hours, yet Michael was already talking about paperwork. "There is no rush," I answered gently. "I would rather leave everything as it is for a little while." He hesitated. I understand. I just do not want important documents sitting around. Something about the conversation reminded me of the warning in my purse. Do not trust anyone carrying your last name. I hated myself for even connecting those thoughts. Michael was my son. I had raised him. Yet for the first time in my life, I found myself listening not only to what he said, but also to what he did not say. After we ended the call, I walked into David's home office. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. His desk was unusually neat, exactly as he always kept it. I opened the top drawer expecting to find unpaid bills or insurance papers. Instead, I found an empty space where a small metal lockbox had always been. I knew that box had been there only 3 days earlier because I had dusted around it before David became ill. It was gone. I searched every shelf, every cabinet, and every closet in the office. Nothing. Standing in the middle of the room, I suddenly remembered something else. During the reception that afternoon, Michael had quietly disappeared from the crowd for nearly 20 minutes. At the time, I assumed he needed a moment alone to grieve. Now I looked at the empty drawer again and realized I had no idea where my son had actually been. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty space in David's desk drawer where the lockbox had always been. By sunrise, I had convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps David had moved it before he became ill. Perhaps I simply remembered the drawer incorrectly. Grief has a way of making certainty feel unreliable. I made a pot of coffee and decided to search the house carefully before allowing suspicion to take root. I checked every closet, every cabinet, the shelves in the garage, even the small safe in our bedroom. The lockbox was nowhere to be found. Around 9 o'clock, Emily called. "Grandma, how are you doing this morning?" she asked. "Better than yesterday," I answered, although it was not entirely true. I hesitated before adding, "Can I ask you something? Yesterday, during the reception, did you happen to see your father leave the room?" There was a short silence. "Actually, yes," she said. "I thought he went outside to take a business call." "How long was he gone?" "Maybe 20 minutes. What?" I almost told her about the missing lockbox, but something stopped me. If the note on Eleanor's card meant anything, I needed to be careful about whom I trusted, even with innocent questions. "It is probably nothing," I replied. "I was just trying to remember the day." Emily did not sound convinced, but she respected my answer. Before hanging up, she said, "Grandma, if something feels wrong, please promise you will tell me. I know everyone thinks Dad has everything under control, but lately, he has been acting different." Her words lingered long after the call ended. That afternoon, I drove to the small coffee shop printed on Eleanor Brooks's business card. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window. Every time the front door opened, my heart beat a little faster. At exactly 2 o'clock, Eleanor walked inside carrying the same black handbag I had seen at the memorial service. She smiled politely and sat across from me without ordering anything. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "You knew I would," I replied. "You left me no choice." She nodded. "I suppose I did." I leaned forward. "Who are you? Were you involved with my husband?" Eleanor did not appear offended. In fact, she almost looked as though she expected the question. "No," she answered. "Your husband loved you until the day he died." I searched her face for any sign of hesitation. There was none. "Then how could you possibly know him better than I did?" Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "Because for 20 years, David trusted me with the part of his life he never wanted you to carry." I felt my chest tighten. What does that even mean? She reached into her handbag and placed a small brass key on the table between us. It was old, slightly worn, and attached to a faded paper tag with the number 214 written in black ink. "He instructed me to give you this only after his funeral," she said. "But before I explain anything else, I need you to answer one question honestly." I stared at the key without touching it. "What question?" Eleanor looked directly into my eyes and asked, "Has Michael already searched David's office?" For a moment, I could not answer. I stared at the brass key resting between us while Eleanor waited patiently. She did not seem surprised by my silence. It was almost as if she already knew what my expression meant. Finally, I looked up. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think he did." Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment, then let out a slow breath. "I was afraid of that." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Michael offered to help organize David's office the very night after the funeral. When I refused, I discovered a lockbox was already missing from his desk. Eleanor nodded without the slightest sign of shock. Then your husband guessed correctly. My heart began beating faster. David expected someone to take it. He expected one specific person, she answered carefully. That is why he prepared a second plan. I looked around the nearly empty coffee shop. The afternoon crowd had thinned, and the quiet hum of the espresso machine was the only sound between us. Nothing about the ordinary setting matched the extraordinary conversation unfolding at our table. Please stop speaking in riddles, I said. I buried my husband 2 days ago. If you wanted me to know something, tell me now. Eleanor leaned forward. Your husband asked me to reveal the truth only if 2 things happened. First, after his funeral. Second, if someone searched his office before you did. I felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Why? Because that would tell him his fears had become reality. I shook my head. None of this makes any sense. David trusted Michael. He loved his son. Both of those things can be true, Eleanor replied gently. Love does not prevent disappointment. Her answer lingered in my mind. During our marriage, David rarely criticized Michael directly. If they disagreed about business or finances, he usually changed the subject before the conversation became uncomfortable. I had always assumed they simply approached life differently. Now I wondered if there had been something much deeper beneath those quiet exchanges. What does this key open? I finally asked. Eleanor pushed it a little closer to me. A safe deposit box at First Mountain Community Bank downtown. Box number 214. Why did David not tell me about it? Because he believed you would immediately tell Michael if he did. I almost protested, but the words never left my mouth. She was right. If David had handed me this key months earlier, I would have mentioned it casually over Sunday dinner without thinking twice. Eleanor seemed to notice the realization on my face. Your husband wanted to protect you from having to choose between your husband and your son while he was alive, she said softly. He believed that choice would break your heart. I wrapped my fingers around the small brass key. It felt heavier than it should have. What is inside the box? Eleanor slowly stood from her chair and picked up her handbag. I have never opened it, she said. Neither did David after he sealed it. Only one other person knows exactly what is inside. Who? I asked. She met my eyes with an expression that mixed sympathy and concern. Daniel Harper, the estate attorney who helped your husband prepare everything. I frowned. Daniel retired almost 5 years ago. Yes, Eleanor replied. Which is why you should ask yourself one question before you visit the bank tomorrow. She paused just long enough for the silence to become unsettling. If Daniel Harper truly retired, why did someone using his name call Michael yesterday morning? The drive home felt much longer than it had that morning. Eleanor's final question echoed in my mind with every traffic light I passed. If Daniel Harper had truly retired, who had called Michael using his name, and why had Michael never mentioned it to me? I placed the brass key on the kitchen counter the moment I walked inside. For several minutes, I simply stood there looking at it. It was such an ordinary object, yet it suddenly carried the weight of my entire marriage. I wanted to call Michael and ask him directly about the missing lockbox, the phone call, and everything Eleanor had hinted at. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and forced myself to think before acting. David had always admired patience. Whenever a difficult situation came up, he used to smile and say, the first person to lose control is usually the first person to lose the truth. For the first time since his funeral, I realized he might have been preparing me for something I never knew existed. My telephone rang just after 6 o'clock. It was Michael. Hi, Mom, he said. I was thinking about stopping by tomorrow morning. We should probably meet with the bank and start reviewing Dad's accounts. His timing immediately caught my attention. Until Eleanor mentioned the safe deposit box, I had not been thinking about the bank at all. Tomorrow might not be convenient, I answered carefully. I have a few errands to run first. There was a pause. What kind of errands? The question sounded casual, but it landed differently after everything I had learned. Just personal things, I replied. Nothing urgent. Another brief silence followed before he laughed softly. Well, let me know if you change your mind. We should not wait too long with financial matters. After we ended the call, I replayed every word. Michael had never been controlling. Organized, yes. Responsible, certainly. But lately, every conversation seemed to circle back to paperwork, bank accounts, or legal documents. It no longer felt like concern. It felt like urgency. Early the next morning, I called First Mountain Community Bank. I explained that I believed my late husband had maintained a safe deposit box and asked what documents I would need to access it. The employee was polite but careful. She confirmed only that appointments were required and that identity and legal authorization would be verified in person. She revealed nothing else. That actually reassured me. Whatever David had left behind was still protected. Before leaving the house, I decided to look through David's desk one more time. This time I searched more slowly, running my fingers along the inside of every drawer. As I reached beneath the center drawer, I felt a small piece of tape. Hidden underneath was a folded yellow note no larger than a business card. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It contained only one sentence written in David's unmistakable handwriting. If you are reading this before opening box 214, do not let Michael know you found the key. I stared at the note for several seconds before a car pulled into my driveway. Through the front window, I saw Michael step out carrying 2 cups of coffee and smiling as if he had come for an ordinary family visit. But then I noticed something else. Parked across the street was a dark gray sedan I had never seen before, and the driver was watching my house instead of the road. My first instinct was to hide the note. I folded it carefully, slipped it into my pocket, and returned the drawer to exactly the way I had found it. The brass key disappeared into another pocket. By the time Michael reached the front porch, my hands were steady again. I opened the front door before he could knock. He smiled warmly and held up the 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you could use something stronger than tea this morning," he said. I smiled back, although it took more effort than I wanted him to notice. "That was thoughtful," I replied as I stepped aside. "Come in." As he walked through the living room, his eyes drifted almost immediately toward David's office. It lasted only a second, but I caught it. Most people would have looked at family photographs or sympathy flowers. Michael looked at the office door. We sat at the kitchen table, speaking about ordinary things at first. Emily had a new assignment at the newspaper. The neighbors had been bringing casseroles. The weather forecast promised rain by the weekend. It almost felt normal. Then Michael placed his coffee cup down and leaned forward. "Mom, have you had a chance to go through Dad's office yet?" The question came too smoothly. "Not really," I answered. "Everything is still where he left it." That was not entirely true, but neither was it a complete lie. He nodded slowly. "There are probably business records that should not sit around too long. I could help today if you would like." I shook my head. "I appreciate that, but I am not ready." His smile remained, but something behind it seemed to fade. "I understand," he said. "I just want to make sure nothing important gets overlooked." As he spoke, I remembered David's handwritten warning. "Do not let Michael know you found the key." For the first time in my life, I found myself studying my own son the way I might study a stranger. Every pause, every glance, every carefully chosen word. "Actually," I said casually, "I found something interesting yesterday." Michael looked up immediately. "What was it?" I reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out an old fountain pen that had belonged to David. His favorite pen. I thought it had been lost years ago. Relief crossed Michael's face so quickly that I almost missed it. It disappeared just as fast, replaced by another polite smile. "Dad always liked that pen," he said. "I am glad you found it." He had expected something else. I was certain of it now. After another few minutes, Michael stood to leave. As I walked him to the front door, I noticed the gray sedan was still parked across the street. The driver remained inside with the windows partially raised. Michael followed my gaze. "Do you know that person?" I asked casually. He barely looked before answering. "No. Probably someone visiting the neighbors." His response came too quickly. Once his car pulled away, the gray sedan waited another 30 seconds before driving off in the same direction. I wrote down the license plate number on the back of an envelope before I could forget it. Just as I slipped the envelope into my purse, my telephone rang. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. "Mrs. Sullivan?" an older man's voice asked. "My name is Daniel Harper. I believe we need to meet before anyone else reaches box 214. For a moment, I could not answer. I tightened my grip on the telephone and walked toward the living room window, watching the empty street where both cars had disappeared only minutes earlier. "Daniel Harper?" I repeated carefully. "Yes," the voice answered. "I realize you have every reason to doubt me. Eleanor Brooks told me that might happen." Hearing Eleanor's name immediately changed my attention. "She said you retired years ago," I replied. "I did retire," he said. That does not mean I stopped honoring promises I made to old clients. His tone was calm, steady, and completely different from the rushed conversations I had been having with Michael. I cannot explain everything over the phone, he continued. But your husband left very specific instructions. One of them was that I should not contact you unless Eleanor confirmed that certain events had already taken place. I looked toward David's office. What events? There was a brief pause. Someone searched his office. The lockbox disappeared, and you found the second message instead. My heart nearly stopped. I had never mentioned the hidden note to anyone. How could you possibly know about that? I whispered. Because David wrote it while I was sitting across the desk from him, Daniel answered. He wanted 2 separate layers of protection. He believed the first one might fail. I slowly sat down in David's favorite chair. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. Why would my husband believe someone in our own family would search his office? I asked. Because he spent the last 2 years quietly verifying something he desperately hoped was not true. Daniel's words settled heavily between us. Did Michael do something illegal? I finally asked. I cannot answer that until you see the documents for yourself, he replied. David insisted that no one, including me, should influence your judgment before you read his own words. I respected that answer, even though it frustrated me. Then what do I do now? Tomorrow morning, Daniel said. Meet me at First Mountain Community Bank at 9 o'clock. Bring your identification, the brass key, and no one else. Not even my granddaughter Emily? Especially not Emily, he answered. Not because she has done anything wrong, but because your husband wanted as few people involved as possible until the contents of Box 214 were secured. I frowned. You make it sound as though someone else might already be trying to reach it. Daniel became unusually quiet before speaking again. Mrs. Sullivan, yesterday afternoon someone called the bank pretending to represent your family. They asked whether access to your husband's safe deposit box had already been requested. A chill ran through me. Did the bank tell them anything? No. Fortunately, their security procedures are excellent. But that phone call confirmed David's concerns. Before I could ask another question, Daniel added, there is one more thing you need to know before tomorrow. I waited. Your husband never believed the greatest danger was inside the box. His voice grew softer. He believed the greatest danger was what someone might do after learning what was inside. The line fell silent for a moment. Then Daniel spoke one final sentence that left me staring at the family photographs on the fireplace. When you arrive tomorrow, do not be surprised if Michael is already waiting in the bank lobby. I arrived at First Mountain Community Bank 20 minutes early. The brass key rested inside my purse, wrapped in one of David's old handkerchiefs as though it deserved more protection than metal alone could provide. Daniel's warning echoed in my mind during the entire drive. Do not be surprised if Michael is already waiting in the lobby. I parked across the street and remained inside my car for a minute, watching people enter and leave the building. An elderly couple walked out carrying envelopes. A young man in a business suit hurried toward the entrance while speaking into a headset. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Then I noticed a familiar SUV pull into the parking lot. Michael stepped out alone. He checked his watch, glanced toward the bank entrance, and walked inside without looking around. My heart sank. He had never mentioned coming to the bank. I waited another 5 minutes before entering through a different door. The lobby was quiet. Michael stood near a display of financial brochures, speaking politely with a receptionist. His back was turned toward me. Before he could notice my arrival, an older gentleman in a charcoal suit approached me from the side. Mrs. Sullivan? He asked softly. I am Daniel Harper. He looked exactly as I had imagined from his voice. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture straight despite his age, and his expression carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades solving difficult problems without raising his voice. He did not offer a handshake. Instead, he simply nodded toward a private hallway. Please follow me. We moved quietly past Michael, who remained focused on his conversation. Whether he truly had not seen me or was pretending not to, I could not tell. Daniel led me into a secure conference room where a bank manager was already waiting. After verifying my identification and the death certificate that I had brought with me, the manager accepted the brass key. Mrs. Sullivan, she said professionally, your husband established special access instructions many years ago. According to our records, only you may enter this safe deposit box after presenting this key. Daniel remained silent. He never attempted to guide the process. A few moments later, The manager unlocked box 214 and placed a long metal container on the table before excusing herself to give us privacy. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. I expected stacks of cash, stock certificates, or jewelry. Instead, the box contained 3 carefully labeled envelopes, a leather journal, and a sealed manila folder marked in David's handwriting. Open only after reading the journal. Nothing about it looked valuable in the traditional sense, yet somehow it felt more important than any fortune could have been. I reached for the journal first. Inside the front cover, David had written a single sentence. "Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I was right to protect the truth until now." I looked up at Daniel. "You already knew what this was about, did not you?" He slowly shook his head. "No. David allowed me to witness the preparation of these materials, but he never allowed me to read them." Before I could open the first page, someone knocked firmly on the conference room door. The bank manager stepped inside looking noticeably uneasy. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, "your son has just requested an emergency meeting with us. He insists your husband promised he would be present when this box was opened, and he says he has documents to prove it." I will continue directly from part 8 while maintaining continuity. Edit Daniel remained perfectly still, but I noticed his eyes narrow ever so slightly. He looked toward the closed journal on the table and then back at me. "Do not make any decisions until you have heard exactly what your son is requesting," he said quietly. The bank manager nodded and stepped aside. A moment later, Michael entered the conference room carrying a slim leather portfolio beneath his arm. He looked surprised to see Daniel standing beside me, but the surprise disappeared almost instantly behind a practiced smile. "Mom," he said warmly, "I was wondering where you went. I came because I thought you should not have to handle all of this alone." His words sounded caring, but they no longer carried the same comfort they once had. I had begun hearing the pauses between his sentences, the careful choice of each word, and the things he never quite explained. "The manager said you have documents," I replied. Michael immediately opened the portfolio and removed several neatly organized papers. "Dad spoke with me about his estate months before he passed," he said. "He told me there could be confusion regarding the safe deposit box. He wanted me present if it was ever opened." Daniel spoke for the first time since Michael entered. "May I see those documents?" Michael hesitated for only a second before handing them over. "Daniel, read each page care." My hands trembled as I turned the page. David had always written with remarkable precision, every letter carefully formed, every sentence deliberate. Even now, his handwriting seemed steady, as though he had expected this exact moment long before illness entered our lives. "Margaret," the journal began, "if Michael is waiting outside this room, then I owe you an explanation I prayed you would never need." I swallowed hard and kept reading. David explained that 18 months before his death, our company's outside accounting firm had discovered several financial transactions that required additional review. At first, they believed the irregularities were simple reporting mistakes. But as the review continued, they uncovered transfers that had been approved using legitimate company authority, while supporting documentation appeared incomplete or inconsistent. David emphasized one point repeatedly. He refused to accuse anyone without proof. Instead, he ordered an independent audit under strict confidentiality. My eyes moved more quickly across the page. The audit was never about protecting money, he had written. It was about protecting our family from making permanent decisions before the truth was known. I looked toward Daniel. He remained silent, allowing me to absorb every word without interruption. The next section explained why Eleanor Brooks had entered our lives. Years earlier, she had worked as a legal records specialist and had quietly assisted Daniel with confidential estate matters. David trusted her ability to safeguard sensitive documents without attracting attention. She became the independent custodian of materials that he feared might disappear if they remained inside our home or office. Suddenly, every mysterious conversation with Eleanor made sense. She had never been protecting herself. She had been protecting David's instructions. I turned another page. David described several meetings with Michael during the audit. He wrote that their conversations became increasingly tense because Michael insisted the review was unnecessary and expensive. David admitted he desperately wanted to believe his son's objections came from frustration rather than fear. A father naturally searches for innocent explanations before accepting painful possibilities, he wrote. My chest tightened. Those words sounded exactly like the man I had loved for more than 4 decades. He had not condemned our son. He had struggled to understand him. Then I reached a sealed envelope tucked carefully between 2 pages. Across the front, David had written, "Open only after reading everything above." Inside was a single typed report signed by the independent accounting firm. The summary stated that the audit had not reached a final conclusion because David suspended further action shortly after receiving a serious medical diagnosis. However, one recommendation stood out immediately. The accountants advised preserving all financial records until additional interviews could be completed with individuals who had authorized or benefited from several disputed transactions. No names appeared on the summary. I let out a slow breath I had not realized I was holding. Why would David stop the investigation? I asked quietly. Daniel answered for the first time in several minutes. Because by then he knew he was running out of time. He believed finishing the investigation himself might permanently divide your family if he was wrong. I lowered my eyes back to the journal. Beneath the audit summary, David had added one final handwritten note. If you have reached this page, there is one document you must read before speaking to Michael. I carefully lifted the manila folder that had remained unopened inside the metal box. Written across its front in thick black ink were 6 words that immediately made my heart race. Recorded conversation. Do not play alone. My eyes remained fixed on the words printed across the manila folder. Recorded conversation. Do not play alone. I looked at Daniel. He gave a slight nod, as though he had expected that exact reaction. David was very specific, he said quietly. He wanted someone else present when you listened, not because he doubted your judgment, but because he did not want you carrying the weight of that moment by yourself. I carefully opened the folder. Inside was a small digital voice recorder, a charging cable, and a handwritten note from David. The note read, "If you are holding this recorder, then I was never able to finish what I started. Listen to the entire conversation before making any decision about Michael. Do not stop after the first surprise. There are 2 truths hidden inside this recording." My hands trembled as I pressed the power button. A soft electronic tone filled the quiet conference room. Then David's familiar voice came through the speaker. "This meeting is being recorded with everyone's knowledge," he said calmly. Hearing his voice again after the funeral nearly took my breath away. I closed my eyes for a moment before forcing myself to continue listening. Another voice followed. It belonged to Michael. He sounded frustrated but controlled. "Dad, you are treating me like I already did something wrong." David answered gently. "No, I am treating the facts with respect. They deserve answers before accusations." The conversation continued. David explained that several financial transactions required clarification because company records no longer matched supporting documentation. Michael insisted the accounting errors resulted from rapid business growth, software changes, and poor record-keeping during an expansion project. His explanations sounded reasonable. In fact, I found myself believing him. Then the recording reached a point that neither Daniel nor I expected. A third voice entered the conversation. I immediately recognized it. Emily. My granddaughter sounded nervous. "Grandpa," she said, "I brought the files you asked for." I looked toward Daniel in confusion. Emily had never mentioned participating in any meeting. David thanked her and asked her to remain in the room because she had independently uncovered several accounting inconsistencies while helping organize archived records during her college internship. She had unknowingly found documents that did not match later financial reports. My heart tightened. Emily had been trying to help her grandfather, not investigate her own father. David calmly reviewed several transactions one by one. Michael answered each question without raising his voice. Then came the moment that changed everything. David asked, "Michael, did you personally approve these transfers?" There was a long silence. Finally, Michael answered, "Yes, but not for the reason you think." Daniel leaned closer as the recording continued. Michael explained that he had moved company funds temporarily between authorized accounts while attempting to protect a major construction project that was in danger of collapsing during an unexpected economic downturn. He admitted he had hidden the transfers because he believed his father would immediately cancel the project, costing dozens of employees their jobs. David did not sound angry. He sounded deeply disappointed that his son had acted alone instead of asking for help. The recording ended abruptly before the discussion reached any conclusion. I stared at the silent recorder. "That cannot be the whole conversation," I whispered. Daniel slowly reached into the bottom of the folder where a smaller sealed envelope had been tucked beneath the recorder. Neither of us had noticed it before. Across the front, in David's unmistakable handwriting, were the words that made my heart begin racing once again. Play the second recording only after Michael tells you why he lied about the audit. For a long moment, neither Daniel nor I spoke. I held the second sealed envelope in my hands, but I did not open it. David's final instruction echoed in my mind. Play the second recording only after Michael tells you why he lied about the audit. I suddenly understood something about my husband that grief had hidden from me. He had never wanted to win an argument after he was gone. He wanted the truth to arrive in the right order. I looked at Daniel. I think it is time to speak with my son. He nodded. That is exactly what David hoped you would decide. A few minutes later, Michael returned to the conference room. His expression softened when he saw me standing instead of reading. "Mom, are you all right?" he asked. I looked at him for several seconds before answering. "I know about the audit." The color slowly drained from his face. He glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "Dad told you." "No," I replied. "He left me enough to understand that you hid something from both of us." Michael lowered his eyes. For the first time since David's funeral, he stopped trying to sound confident. "I never wanted you to find out this way," he said quietly. "Then tell me the truth now." He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. "The transfers were real," he admitted. "But I never stole a dollar." He explained that several years earlier the company faced the collapse of its largest commercial project. If the project failed, dozens of longtime employees would lose their jobs, and several subcontractors who had worked with our family for decades would likely go bankrupt. Believing he could solve the problem alone, he shifted money between authorized corporate accounts without fully documenting every temporary transfer. His intention had been to replace every dollar once financing was secured. Eventually, he did exactly that, but by then the paperwork no longer matched the accounting records. When Dad discovered it, Michael continued, he thought someone might have been hiding something much worse. I wanted to explain everything, but every explanation sounded like an excuse. Tears filled his eyes. Then he became sick. After that, every conversation felt too important to risk ending in another argument. I reached into my purse and removed the second sealed envelope. "David said I should not open this until after you told me why you lied." Michael looked at the envelope and slowly nodded. "Then you should open it." I carefully broke the seal and pressed the play button on the second recorder. David's voice filled the quiet room once again. "Margaret, if you are hearing this recording, then Michael finally trusted you with the truth. I never believed my son was dishonest. I believed he was proud, frightened, and convinced he had to carry every burden alone. The audit was never meant to destroy him. It was meant to teach him that integrity requires transparency, especially with the people who love you most. Eleanor protected these records because I feared confusion. Daniel protected the legal process because I feared haste. But you, Margaret, have always protected this family. That responsibility now belongs to you one last time. Forgive carefully, judge fairly, and remember that the greatest inheritance I leave behind is not this company. It is the chance for our family to choose honesty over silence." When the recording ended, no one spoke. I walked around the table and embraced my son for the first time since the funeral. We both cried quietly, not because every wound had disappeared, but because the years of unanswered questions finally had. As we left the bank together, I noticed Eleanor standing across the street. She smiled gently, tipped her head toward me, and walked away without waiting for thanks. Only then did I realize she had never come to reveal a secret that would destroy my marriage. She had come to fulfill the final promise my husband made to protect it, even after he was gone.